Hello, I'm L. Christopher Bird. This is our third class in the Jedi Path Academy Learners program. Tonight we're going to be presented by Breeze L. Tierno, and I'm going to throw it over to him, and he'll introduce the class and we'll get on our way. Take it away, Breeze.
Hello, my name is Breeze L. Tierno. Thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate the opportunity to share this practice and discussion with you. With that, let's go ahead and jump in. You have it?
There we go. Yep.
So, a Jedi's practice of serenity. The Jedi Path Academy Learners program by Breeze L. Tierno, who is me. A brief rundown. I joined the Jedi Academy. I joined the Jedi community in a public sense in 2014 at the gathering that year. I've been practicing and studying since then. I'm a founder and co-admin for Jedi Empire State and for Intersectional Jedi. I am an unapologetic advocate of the light side, and if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them later, but I'd prefer to just sort of jump in. So, when we talk about a serenity practice, I'm going to try to couch a lot of the language in a context that I'm familiar with, I hope you are familiar with and comfortable with. So a lot of this will come out of dialectical behavioral therapy. A lot of it will come out of 12-step literature. I think most of us have at least a passing familiarity with it. And we can begin with Reinhold Niebuhr. Reinhold Niebuhr wrote what would eventually be called the Serenity Prayer. I think we're all familiar with it. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There have been literally dozens of edits of this excerpt of the prayer. Since its original publication, it eventually became known as the Serenity Prayer when it was adopted by Alcoholics Anonymous in 1955. I'm a fan, and I think it is going to give us a useful framework on which to build this discussion. So we may end up referring back to this frequently. Why is this important? I would have to refer back to the work of Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton was a Trappist monk, lived in Gethsemane in West Virginia. One of the discussions in his autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain, goes as such: the more you try to avoid suffering, the more you suffer, because smaller and more insignificant things begin to torture you in proportion to your fear of being hurt. The one who does most to avoid suffering is, in the end, the one who suffers most. If we're wondering why serenity is a valuable practice / capacity, this has a lot to do with it. That the degree to which we are estranged from natural experience, we are disproportionately harmed by it. I'm not going to dwell too much on this today. It's going to come up in a later program I'm working back with, but we're all familiar with Yoda's admonition. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hatred. Hatred leads to suffering. I am generally of the opinion that this thing which we call the dark side is not a function of the terrible things that we do. Rather, the terrible things we do and are delving into that darkness, that hiding from the light, is a function of an unaddressed wound, and the suffering that comes of the unaddressed wound. So I maintain, and suggest that you do as well, a serenity practice, particularly to deal with unaddressed wounds, but also to prevent new ones. So what is serenity? Serenity is an acceptance of what is, releasing the need for things to be other than how they are. This is not a magical instant happiness. It releases us from suffering, though not from pain. This is important, and this is kind of one of my take-home messages. It's valuable to understand that serenity is not bliss. We often encounter the words bliss and serenity in the same context, and so it is normal to think of them as interchangeable, but I think this is incorrect. If I am injured in the body, for instance, I've harmed myself, serenity does not make my broken leg stop hurting. But a practice of serenity allows me to not add the suffering of, what about all the things that can happen that I can't control about this? What about all the extra fear, the extra anxiety? And allows me to just invest in this moment. I am hurt. What should I do? So we're resigned to the present. We do not add the burden of fleeing from experience. We accept that any experience will pass in its own time. This is also important when we talk about acceptance of what is. Acceptance does not equal approval. They are not the same thing. If I accept, for instance, we talked about my broken leg for a moment. If I accept, I have broken my leg, I'm not saying, oh good, I have broken my leg. I'm merely saying, this is true. And hoping that it is otherwise will not change it. And wishing it were otherwise will not help me. So to back up, if I say serenity is acceptance of what is, often the things that we have the most challenge in accepting are very difficult, often very painful things. Someone breaks my heart and I am asked to accept it. I don't want to accept it. It's not okay. Acceptance is not approval. Acceptance is not lending my own sense of moral sanction to the things that harm me. It is merely admitting this is true. Read that twice. It's important. We'll come back to it if we have to. It is a fairly simple idea, but it's easy for it to get away from us. Why do we struggle? Where are we mistaken? How often do we confuse what can be changed with what cannot? It's an important question, and I would submit that a fairly sizable portion of human suffering is wrapped up in this specific confusion. Things that can be changed will at times feel insurmountable. Things that cannot be changed will receive, the full force of my struggle and effort fruitlessly, and only to my detriment. To go back to the broken heart, I will make this one or that one love me again. When someone says it to you, you know it's foolish, but every one of us has said it. So it's worth it to roll over these questions. What can be changed? Both in the general sense of, in the universe, what can be changed, what cannot be changed, what is there to be done, but also in this particular circumstance, whatever it is that I'm grappling with. There are probably several layers of this experience. Things that can be altered, things that cannot. And maybe the things that can be changed are largely internal. How often do we confuse what can be changed with what cannot? Quite often, actually. We do it all the time. And this is a primary barrier to serenity. As I said, I suspect that this confusion is at the root of a great deal of human suffering. Every one of us has treated fixable problems like they were the end of the world. Every one of us has picked our favorite brick wall and bashed their heads against it. And I can say this in all humility. We've all done it. No blame, no need for further recriminations, no insults. You know, in humility, we accept. People do this, I do this. And just try to do better. So the courage to change the things we can. What can be changed? This is an important question. What can be changed by you now? It's sort of like, can someone change this? Or can I change it? Can I do it today? The last thing I want to talk about, and as we get into particulars, we'll run back to this, considering costs and benefits. Is it worth it? I know, for instance, speaking with my son, I have two boys, one of whom is 6 and wired for sound. And I love him, and I'm also a cranky old man. And on occasion, I want him to amend his behavior. Could I get him to amend his behavior? I bet I could. Is it worth it? Is how he will feel and how I will feel worth my irritation? Or is this just a thing I can bear or choose to bear? Our power to create change. When we talk about power, I'm going to define it simply as the ability to achieve an end, often, or at least sometimes in the presence of resistance. Can you do a thing? We will often find ourselves trapped in conditions of absolutes that are rarely accurate. This next part is important. We are neither all-powerful nor powerless, but we have a tendency to fall into those traps, those illusions of, you know, all-powerfulness or powerlessness. They can be very compelling. Sometimes, you know, especially if I'm angry, I need to, or afraid, I need to believe in my own power. I need to believe in my own omnipotence in order to bolster my ego. Other times I need to believe that I'm powerless, again, to bolster the ego so that the thing that I do not address is not my fault. My powerlessness, when it is a false powerlessness, is a way of avoiding responsibility. And our tendency to, you know, abuse ourselves for error. Our ability to change things, and therefore our definition of what is changeable, are conditional. And the first way that they're conditional is pretty simple. If I am, I don't know, poorly fed, poorly rested, dehydrated, sick, sad, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, I'm simply less effective. If I'm not feeling strong that day for any variety of reasons, I'm less effective. And that is apart from the more complex things that might get in my way. Yes, there are ways in which I am powerless, but clarity of vision in this sense is extremely important. Before I want to move on to powerlessness, there's a thing I didn't mention, and I want to do it before I forget. We were talking earlier about what is serenity, that it being the acceptance of what is. And I want to emphasize something. It's a fair question to ask, is serenity, is it a state of mind? Is it a state of being? Is it a process? And one could certainly argue it's all those things. What I'm going to emphasize this evening is serenity as process. And the why of that is important. If I make serenity a state that I am meant to A, achieve, B, abide in at all times, so that when something happens, I am fundamentally unruffled by my own experience, that is a pass-fail. I'm either untouchable or I'm not. And the difficulty, of course, is that a lot of the pictures and models of serenity that we are familiar with occur in the context of books and movies, etc., where some sort of serene enlightenment is being modeled by a person who is that way all the time. My bias is for development, and so I'm going to emphasize us talking about serenity as a practice one works through rather than a place where you live. To simply say, well, I was serene or I was not, well, chances are you were not. On the other hand, and then that becomes failure, a source of greater suffering, greater self-recrimination, greater doubt, yada, yada. Whereas saying, I practiced with some degree of success, the action of coming to terms with an alteration in my experience, a thing changed, it hurt, I accepted it. That's doable. So that is going to be our bias when we're talking about this in terms of a practice. Back to powerlessness. What absolutely cannot be changed? This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's not a bad one. Chris referred to it as a first order list. If any of the things you're talking about appear on this list, you can safely move on. So we can talk about things like, laws of nature. If you fall out of the building, you're going to fall to the ground. Time only moves in one direction in our normal experience. If we're talking about impermanence, entropy, mortality, these things cannot be altered. Certainly the past cannot be altered, though the caveat to this is my narrative concerning the past can certainly be re-examined. I made a career of working with trauma survivors, and one of the most important alterations to a narrative that we can come up with is simple changes like moving from this is the thing that almost destroyed me to this is a thing I survived. Nothing has changed about the past. Our fundamental understanding of the past has not changed. We're merely re-emphasizing I lived as opposed to I nearly died. You are not an exception to any of these rules, nor is anyone that you love. And a fundamental first step in a serenity practice is accepting these things. If you find the sort of some of the contemporary responses, in particular the coronavirus, very frustrating, it is because, at least in part, of a fundamental failure of some people to distinguish where they are powerful and where they are powerless. You know, we have immune systems. I'm sure I'll be one of the exceptions that doesn't get sick even if I contract the virus, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to go to one of these silly parties. No, chances are, if you are exposed to the illness, you will become ill, and then you will deal with the illness. You know, when we make ourselves exceptions to these rules, we set ourselves up for a lot of trouble. A big portion of serenity as a practice, for me in particular, is forgiveness. I want to take a moment to reference Araya Mountain Dreamer. I don't know if you're familiar with her books. She's fantastic. She said a thing that I thought was particularly valuable in this respect. She says, when beginning a forgiveness practice, start with the guy that cut you off in traffic. Don't jump straight to your mom. You know, keep it simple. Start with the small things. It's like going to the gym. You lift the 5-pound weights before you lift the 500-pound weights. You know, because if you can't forgive the small thing done by the person who doesn't mean a ton to you, how can you hope to forgive the bigger stuff? When we're talking about forgiveness, what is it? Forgiveness is an acceptance that a thing happened, that is unalterable. It happened. It cannot unhappen, but it does not need to continue to harm me. Carrying that resentment poisons me and does nothing to change their behavior or heal me. Active resentment gives me nothing beyond the illusion of power and the high of righteousness. Living in blame keeps me in the injury. What is it not? I am not saying that what happened was okay, or that nothing happened, or that we can carry on as though nothing happened. Forgiveness is more complex than we may think. We want it to be simple. When we have been in the wrong, we only begin to appreciate the complexity of forgiveness when we feel the burden of having been vulnerable to the choices of others. Forgiveness is a process, not an event. One may have to come to the realization that leads to forgiveness many times, and depending on what we're forgiving, it may be a thing we do daily. That can be frustrating if you have been the one in the wrong. I will say, I'm sorry, you'll say it's okay, then you're still mad, and I'm meant to act as though you're the one being unreasonable. But that, I think, is a fundamental misunderstanding of the difficulty of forgiveness. We're not saying what you did was okay. Often what you did was not okay. And sometimes I am gravely affected by it down the line. And it is not saying we will talk about it as though we will live as though this never happened, but we will perhaps offer a way forward. Why are we talking about? First of all, particularly if the things that we are responding to occurred in the past, we have to put them down. In the context of my Jedi practice, I know that several times when I am responding to something that's happening to me, that's bothering me, in the present tense, there is a prior experience that's sort of informing that and egging me on. That is not the fault of the person in front of me, quite often. So at this point, I'm going to ask Christopher to pause the recording. We're going to talk about things that are somewhat more personal, and if you weren't here, and then we'll pick up the recording again in just a moment. So Christopher, you wouldn't mind? And we're back. Touching base again on the framework provided for us by Reinhold Niebuhr. The courage to change the things I can, the serenity to accept the things I cannot, the wisdom to know the difference. I feel like developing the courage to change the things you can is a bigger topic than I'm prepared to address as simply a portion of this, so we'll come back to it later. What develops wisdom and serenity? Primarily experience, in particular error. Don't worry, you'll make lots of mistakes, so the field from which you can harvest from your errors will be vast and bountiful. That's the good news. The bad news, of course, is it might hurt. Experience is an excellent teacher, particularly when paired with self-examination and with reflection. So what can we do? Well, what can we do? Well, I can assign homework. Optional assignments. Please consider submitting a summation of your experiences at the end of the practice. At the end of your practice, not this. There's two real things that I'm going to suggest. The first is meditation. Consider, just to start, 4 weeks of practice, say 15 minutes of daily practice. I won't describe a mindfulness practice to you now. If you have questions, I'd certainly be happy to address them outside of this. The thing, though, that I want you to notice in particular are the sticking points, the particularly compelling objects, the things that we would refer to as distractions. In the past, in the present, the sorts of things that catch us. It is valuable to perhaps keep some sort of written record. Today, the quality of my practice was this. The sort of thing I got stuck on was this. The sort of center of gravity I kept getting dragged back to was this. What you want to note are the patterns. Do you keep getting dragged back to the same thing or the same sorts of things? What do these things have in common? I'm also a big fan of journaling. I think journaling is an absolutely clutch practice for Jedi. And what I would recommend is at the end of each week, reading over briefly what you've written. Again, looking for trends. What is the sort of stuff that repeats? To give a personal example, I went over, some time ago, I went over an old journal and was shocked to note that within the first paragraph of every single entry in that book, I wrote, "I'm in a great deal of pain today." I wasn't really conscious of, and then, and then went on to describe how the pain had kind of impacted my experience and wasn't really conscious of how much sort of my unaddressed physical needs, what a dramatic impact they'd had on my ability to think, on my ability to address my own experience, and how much of that I was just sort of swallowing and stuffing. And it becomes important because it all gets in the way. You know, if I want to have a well-integrated practice as a Jedi, to my thinking, a great deal of that is consideration of awareness of one specific facet of the Force, which is the relationships around me, the ways in which I am tied to and bound up in the things around me, particularly how my decisions affect other people, how other people's choices affect me, how my history and the histories of the people around me, and therefore our futures, are bound up together. But in my pain and in my tendency to run from future suffering, I fall into a number of very compelling illusions, one of which is that I am not connected to anyone, that I can do whatever I like, or one of the other popular ones is the thing you did didn't actually hurt me at all, because I'm so very strong, and I don't want to admit that I'm not. When I recommend a meditation and journaling practice, what we're talking about is a practice in reflection and self-awareness. What am I getting caught on? Can I change those things? Can I not change those things? What do I need to accept? What do I need to let go of? What is the experience that requires my serenity? Where are the gaps in my serenity? What is providing a barrier or an obstruction to my relationship to the world around me? At this point, I'm going to try to talk less and open up the ground for questions. If any of you decide to try the practices, if enough of you want to talk about it, we can get back together in this forum and talk about it together. If you just want to talk to me about it, I will make myself available to you. If you don't really feel like it's any of my business, that's okay too. Thank you very much for your time, your effort, your patience. Thank you for the consideration and faith in coming here and assuming I had something to say. The Force is with us. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts, feelings, observations? Tierno wrote something, and I'll just take a moment to read it aloud. They say, just a note on journaling, I am trying a technique where I write about an event in the third person. It really helps me become an observer of my own mind and emotions. I found patterns are easier for me to see when I do this. That's an excellent idea. Actually, it's fascinating. Make a better world. Does anyone else have any questions, thoughts, feelings, observations?
Christopher raised his hand.
Christopher.
Hi. So first off, great. fantastic presentation. So I want to talk a little bit about a related Jedi concept that I think comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interchangeably either our sphere of influence or our sphere of responsibility sometimes. And knowing the edges of where that is kind of helps us with these questions of what can I change and what's
Absolutely.
beyond it. And the mindfulness and reflection can really help us understand what's within our sphere of influence and what's outside of it. I mean, outside of like we said, those first order things, like laws of nature in the past, like clearly, but some things just fall outside what we can do. And I wanted to know if you have any thoughts on the concept of sphere of influence, sphere of responsibility, and how it deals with serenity practice.
Yeah, I think we're basically describing, we're just using disparate language to talk about the same thing. If something is within my sphere of influence, then I have a decision to make about what I want to do, what I ought to do. Certainly, whether the cost benefit is there. One of the interesting things about it is that we say quite frequently, well, you can't change other people. And would that it were true. The trouble is, we absolutely can change other people. If you have survived trauma, then you know that you have been altered by the decisions of other people. But it's not exactly a surgical, it's not exactly a process of any, surgical precision. And then I have to say, in attempting to alter the behavior of other people, not only, best case scenario, it's futile. Worst case scenario, I'm doing harm. Even if, my desire is to say, oh, well, it's justified because I don't like what's happening to me. Well, I have a choice to make, But yeah, if it lies outside of my sphere of influence, my sphere of power, I kind of have to let it be. And that's extremely challenging to do. Why is it outside of my stream of my sphere of influence? Well, is it permanently outside of my sphere of influence? Is it just outside of my sphere of influence today? Or can I only, take a chip at it? I've been dealing with health problems over the last several months, primarily because I haven't been dealing with certain health problems over the last couple of years. Thought I was, but I was wrong. Can I become fit? Yes, but not today. I can't six-pack abs today. I have to let go of that. But what can I do now? I have to break down the layer distinctions. What is within my sphere of and what isn't? And it, again, we're kind of talking about the same thing. What is within my ability to change, I then have to decide what I want to do, what I ought to do, how I could go about it. And the stuff that's outside of it, I just kind of have to let that go. I can tell someone who is being harmed, I wish you would stop allowing it. I wish you would leave. I can offer help, but, I can't swing in through a window, with a mask and a cape, steal them away and solve all their problems, much as I might want to, But if I accept the ways in which I am powerless and become cognizant of the ways in which I am able in this way or that, things become more manageable. But again, that serenity of, okay, well, this is not within my sphere of influence. It's hard, but it is, I think, essential, absolutely essential. The option is to, begin this process of poisoning myself with the sort of resentments that can, over time, have a profound impact on my behavior, on my choices, on the way I treat people. Does that satisfy?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Alex, or Breeze.
Does anyone else have anything to ask, or have I explained this so thoroughly that there are no questions at all? Ooh,
Extremely thorough.
out Australia. Hi,
Hi,
how are you?
good.
What's on your mind?
I did want to make a comment of something that you said while you were talking about your experience. It did remind me some of my own, and something that helped a lot during my healing was remembering that the people who are important to you, or the picture that you have of other people in your head, aren't always who they are.
Mm-hmm.
I experienced childhood abuse when I was a kid, and I know this is recorded, so this is okay. But my mom wasn't a part of that abuse, and I always kind of felt guilty that she wasn't really aware of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
But years later, once I got to the point where I accepted what I had experienced as a child and had found forgiveness, I found that it swelled all over again when I found out that my mother hadn't really moved on herself from that experience, because she admitted to me that if that my abuser hadn't done whatever he did, that she would have returned to him now. But that person was still very harmful to her and was very abusive to her. And it was very startling to hear her say that, because in my head, I had always pictured my mom as this mama bear, because she was a provider. She was an advocate for some of her things. So in my head, I was like, if she had known, she would have protected me. I know if she would have known this, she would have been there for me. And to have that picture of what I had in my head come crumbling down was very earth-shattering to me. But something that has helped me try to move forward and find that acceptance or that forgiveness is to realize that my mom is her own person. She is not this person in my head who I had imagined or what I think a mom should be. She's her own person with her own troubles, and trying to humanize her instead of making her, I guess, fit into this picture of what a mom should be, was very started taking me on the path of acceptance, I guess, or healing, trying to see things as you mentioned, how things are. So I think that's something too that we should be aware of, that what kind of biases, I guess, are you placing on this other person? Are you in your head mad at the person that you're picturing who they are versus who they actually are? Because I think that's something too that gets lost when you are creating relationships. You create a picture of who they are in your head, but not in who they are in reality. So you hear that a lot in like trauma cases where like, no, he loves me, he does this and this and that, but his actions are something different, or their actions are something different, or her actions are something different. So I think it's really particular how we perceive others, to be able to accept what is, if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. May I speak to that?
Yes.
Okay. So, one of the things you mentioned, and it's beautiful and true, and it's that, we often deal with each other in this sort of, our interactions with each other are often very secondhand, and that's not even, strictly the province of people who are trauma survivors. I am often dealing not with you, but with the sort of the avatar in my head of the you I am, interested in, willing to accept, blah, blah, blah. And so, if I'm dealing with the you in my head that I am prepared to deal with, whether it's I've decided that you don't have any problems, or I've decided that you're a series of problems that I can actually solve, or, what have you. There's a million different delusions that fit into that category. Again, I'm not dealing with you, and therefore I'm not dealing with us. And to bring it back to, a discussion of the force and relationality, if I'm dealing with secondhand you, I'm dealing with this whole fictional set of relationship principles and not the actual person in front of me. The other thing that I want to point out is that, we encounter ourselves sometimes by a completely different set of rules than we encounter each other. So the thing that you mentioned with your mom, I've seen that all the time. People who will, quite valiantly stick up for a friend, like really go to the mat for a loved one, but take all sorts of abuse themselves. How dare you hurt the one I love, but me, it's not that big a deal. It's fine. And we get back to a couple principles there. One of which is like, if the rules apply to you, then the rules apply to me. Like, I'm not an exception to the rules. If you are lovable, I must be as well. If you are worthy of, protection and regard and respect, then I must be as well. And if you matter because you're connected to everything, then I must be as well, and that's one of the tricks, right? When I can't tell the difference between what is in my sphere of ability and what is not, one of the consequences of that is that I start thinking that the different rules apply to you and different rules apply to me. And again, I'm sort of dealing with reality in secondhand. And it's a great shame, and it so thoroughly gets in the way of everything, of just living. I mean, it's not even of everything I want to achieve. Is that, like, my life is the series of goals for my, my hero story, Achievement Unlocked. It's just, I just want to live my life. And I want to live my life in an appreciation of how beautifully and intimately I am connected to everything. It's not me living my life. I'm part of it, And if I am suffering, and if I'm resentful, and if I'm confused because the choices of other people cause me to suffer beyond the sort of regular pain, I can't live that way. You're always just sort of running on that empty tank, and it's so painful. And yeah, that thing, I would have gone back to him except for what happened to you. That's painful, isn't it? Like, but why aren't you worth it?
Yeah.
Why am I worthy of protecting and not you, you beautiful person who I've loved my whole life? Because we don't see ourselves well. Because we often fall into the illusion of, I can't control that, but I want to be able to. Or I could help that, but I can't deal with the responsibility. And so many other things. I mean, it's not quite as simple as that, but that's the specific delusion that we're addressing this evening. And yeah, it's painful to watch. And yeah, part of the practice of serenity is saying, she's working on that. She's working on loving herself. And what else is there for you to do but love her along the way? You know, what are you going to smack her until she's nice? No, you're just going to love her along the way. It's nothing else to do. Turkania wrote a thing. They ask, what strategy? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Before I move on, is that okay, or do you have other thoughts, feelings?
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make my comment on being mindful of the projection, or the image you make of others, because that is truly one of the most important parts of realizing what actually is. Because that was my biggest hurdle, trying to understand that my mom isn't the image of who I pictured her to be. She's like her own person, her own human being. So there's still so much of accepting. There's so many levels of accepting what is, but one of them is definitely being mindful of what you project onto others.
Thank you. I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you so much.
Okay.
To jump to Kenya's point, what strategies do you use to work past your knee-jerk reactions to regain serenity in the moment? Well, the first one is that mindfulness practice of just noticing, hopefully before something stupid jumps out of my mouth, but sometimes after something stupid jumps out of my mouth. I got a belly full of stupid. It just, oof. And asking myself, well, first stopping myself. And sometimes the only thing I can do is say nothing at all. Like I literally just need to sit on my hands and say, until I know what's going on, I just need to stop. I need to determine if I'm responding. Am I responding to the event in front of me, or am I responding to, my own thoughts and my own habits about what I'm seeing? And sometimes, quite frankly, I go back to the code, and I think it's important. I regard the code as just a process, a way of not just simply a place to arrive, but a way of arriving there. But I go through my practice. I ask myself a series of questions. And what is most helpful is knowing that I have made it a habit of apologizing where I'm wrong, and being willing to be humble in those situations where I note that it's necessary. And that takes some of the pressure off. If I am willing to be humble, then if I need to be right, I'm going to commit to my knee-jerk reaction. Brene Brown said a thing that my wife quoted just tonight, and I think it was excellent. She says, "I'm not here to be right. I'm here to get it right." I'm not here to already have, the perfect Zen Jedi enlightened response. I'm here to practice my path and try to arrive at the right answer for my own benefit, not to be perfect and impress other people. So humility of just saying, you know what, I don't always know. That's something that's not in my control all the time either. That sort of makes it easier. The pressure is off then. Anybody else?
I just wanted to add to that, if that's okay, Alex, in terms of like strategies to pause before that knee-jerk moment. I've found definitely as part of mindfulness practice that I've done that emotions have a real physicality to them, I mean, like whether it's based in trauma, which definitely lives in the body, or, something just even like being pissed off at something relatively minor, like the more you, like when you are having a strong emotion, you take a deep breath and you catalog what physical sensation is going on, like, is my throat tight? Do I feel nauseous? Do I have a sort of, like what is feeling different? What is feeling intense? And sort of mentally start to hook those reactions up to the emotions that are causing that physical reaction. Those like physical sensations are often like really, really useful, like little like ping of a red flag of like, if I'm about to respond in a way that is not actually authentic with what I want, of like someone says something and I feel this sort of like rising like tension in my stomach. I'm like, oh, I'm having a very strong response to this. Like, that means I need to like take a deep breath and be like, cool, what emotion is that? Why am I feeling it? Let's process that before I even like deal at all with what's causing it. So I think that paying attention to not just the logic of it or the emotional part of it, but the like real physical nature of our bodies need to, object or resist something that we find painful or threatening or stressful.
Yeah, that's a very powerful point. Particularly, that's too many leaves. Particularly when we're in distress, if someone asks you, how do you feel? I don't know. I'm angry and I'm sad and I'm scared and I'm so many things. But if you ask, like, what's your body doing right now? Well, that's actually profoundly consistent. Every one of us has a series of very consistent physical cues that are probably a lot, the mind is mysterious. The body is very consistent. If my shoulders are balled up and my stomach feels like it's in a knot, it's the same way every time. That awareness of body is absolutely clutch. It's something I work on and try to teach as part of a body practice. It's just, and it still sneaks up on me. Someone will write on my Facebook page, take a moment. Is your jaw clenched? I'm like, well, actually it was, and I didn't even know, So yeah, that's a valuable point. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, well then, if everybody has said what they said, if everyone has said what they need to say, we can wrap things up. If anybody feels like talking about things that they prefer not to have recorded, we can talk about that too. Otherwise, again, thank you everybody so much for your time, your effort, your patience, and your willingness to give me my time to speak. Thank you all so much.